2025 was a seriously good year for plugins. We got a ton of new and innovative tools, and a bunch of them have already become staples in my production and mixing work. So with the end of the year approaching, I thought I'd break down my top 10 plugins of the year. And if you end up wanting to grab any of these, there are links down in the description. Probably about half of them are affiliate links, so using them is the same price for you, but a big help for the channel. So I really appreciate it when you guys use those. So starting off with one I'm really excited about, we've got Purified Audio's 5420. This just came out a couple weeks ago, but I was on the beta team for this, so I've been using it on almost every song I've worked on over the last year and a half. I couldn't wait for this to finally get released so I could tell all my friends to go buy it, because it really is just that good. The 5420 is at its core a tape emulation plugin, but while most tape plugins try to perfectly recreate a specific machine, Purified went a different route, creating something completely new while still capturing all their favorite things about tape. The big selling point is that you get completely independent control over the saturation of the highs versus the lows. For example, you might want to set the low end to 15 IPS to thicken things up and add a ton of weight, but then you can set the highs to 30 IPS for a more open top end. Or on a lot of sources, I love driving the top end way harder than the bottom to smooth out sharp transients and reduce harshness while leaving the low end clean and full. This plugin is absolutely amazing on drums and guitars, and if you want to see some of my favorite ways to use this, check out the presets I made that come included with the plugin. They highlight a bunch of the things that this plugin does really well. Next up is Articulate from Newfangled Audio. This is like a transient designer on steroids. Instead of just attack and sustain, Articulate splits the signal into 4 parts: smack, punch, body, and air, letting you really fine-tune your sounds. Even something simple like adding attack to a kick or snare becomes way more flexible. Increasing smack brings out that initial clicky transient, while pushing punch brings up the moment right after that. Still more attack, but without the sharp clickiness. Same for sustain. Body and air let you shape the tail in more musical ways. I found that bringing up the body is an awesome way to lengthen a drum without dragging up a bunch of bleed or other junk that comes after the hit. But I've also been finding this useful in situations where I wouldn't normally reach for a transient designer. For instance, I was mixing a track recently where the overheads had more snare than I wanted. Or maybe it wasn't so much the amount of snare, but just the way it was interacting with the close mics wasn't quite working for me. I ended up using Articulate on the overhead tracks, reducing the smack slider, which removed a lot of the initial transient of the snare while not messing up the cymbal sound like a traditional transient designer would. Next, we've got a plugin that could genuinely replace entire plugin chains in your session, and that's K-Strip from Kive Audio. It's a channel strip featuring EQs, compressors, and preamp style saturation from Neve, SSL, and API, letting you mix and match modules to build your dream strip. And with the ability to drag and drop to reorder the modules, plus a gate, transient shaper, and stereo width controls, this could easily cover like 90% of your mixing needs. Although I will say, I think the transient shaper is way too subtle, but I figure it's a bonus that it's there at all, so I'll let it slide. But maybe my favorite thing about K-Strip is that they didn't emulate the most obvious choices from the big 3, opting instead to go with some less common options that you probably wouldn't find elsewhere in plugin form. Like instead of going with a 1073 or 1081 for the Neve EQ, they went with a 1064. Or I believe the SSL EQ is based on the 5000 series instead of the 4000. It's refreshing. You still get the Neve, SSL, and API vibe, but with something a little different that you don't see everywhere else. But if you are looking for emulations of the more classic classics, the next plugin, well, technically plugins, might be for you. The Mix Bundle 1 from Slate Digital. And I know what some of you are thinking. Wait, haven't those been out for like a decade now? Why are they on a best of 2025 list? And you'd be partially right. These plugins were part of their virtual mix rack, but this year, they finally released them as standalone plugins. I used these a ton years ago, but eventually got annoyed by the rack and moved on to other tools. But I've been using them again for the last few months, and man, I forgot how good these sound. The bundle includes their SSL and Neve EQs, an 1176 and a VCA compressor, all for $99. All 4 of them sound fantastic. But besides the sound, something I really appreciate is their low CPU usage. As I've been using more of these Slate virtual modules, I've been having smoother mix sessions with less track freezing needed. So that's a big bonus. Alright, this next one is pretty wild. You're probably familiar with both algorithmic and convolution reverbs, and all the reverbs you own probably fall into one of those 2 categories. But Eventide released a whole new category of reverb called modal reverb in their new Temperance Pro plugin. Apparently modal reverb has existed in theory for decades, but the computing power wasn't there to actually make it happen until recently. I'm not nearly smart enough to fully understand how modal reverb works, so I won't get too deep into it, but my understanding is that instead of using delay lines like an algorithmic reverb, it uses thousands and thousands of individual resonators to simulate a room or space. And I mean, that's cool and all, but as producers and mixing engineers, that doesn't really matter if it doesn't sound good or do anything new or different. But Temperance does sound good, and it does do something very new and different. You can use it just as a normal reverb, and with 29 different spaces available, ranging from rooms and halls to plates and caves, and and even a setting called Sci-Fi, it can cover a lot of ground. But where things get really interesting is with the temper knob. As you increase the knob, the reverb begins to resonate with the chosen musical notes. So like, you can have the reverb resonate at the root or the one chord of the song, or you can use the sequence mode or MIDI mode to make it follow the chord progression to relate the reverb more to the music. Or if you decrease the temper knob, the opposite happens. It pulls the selected pitches out of the reverb, which can help clear up space so that your reverb is kind of wrapping around the source instead of competing with it. And the tempering can be applied to just the early reflections, just the late, or both. So it gives you a ton of flexibility. I feel like I've only scratched the surface of what this plugin can do, but it's a lot of fun and can create some really interesting sounds. They also released Temperance Lite, which is free until December 31st. Same concept, just more limited. And it's free, so go grab it. Plus, having Temperance Lite allows you to upgrade to Temperance Pro for $79 instead of $179, so you should still grab it even if you plan on getting the Pro version. Apparently it was a good year for reverbs, because we've got another cool one on my list. Ocean Way Studios Deluxe from Universal Audio. This is an updated version of the old UA Ocean Way plugin with a new interface, added EQs, compressors, and chambers, and maybe most importantly, it's now native, so no need for UA hardware to use it. This plugin nails that in-the-room sound that's surprisingly hard to get from most reverbs. Like, it's not the big, lush, beautiful sound you'd get from something like a Lexicon reverb. It just puts the source into a real-sounding space. I've been loving this on drum rooms or overheads when I want them to sound like they were recorded in a bigger space, or for just adding a little air around sampled pianos and keyboards, or even acoustic guitars. It's perfect for when you don't want something to sound like it has reverb, but you want to hear a space around it. Up next is Viralia from Mixland. It's a pretty new release, but it's already found its way into a bunch of my mixes. This is an EQ and compressor loosely based on the DW Fern VT5 and VT7. I say loosely because instead of trying to create a one-to-one recreation, they used those units as an inspiration and then added features and tweaks to match the sound and vibe they were aiming for. The EQ is one of those you almost can't make it sound bad tools. It's got separate boosts and cuts for the highs and lows, kind of similar to how a Pultec works, except the boosts and cuts have independent frequency controls, giving you a lot more tone shaping power from the interaction of those bands. And the compressor is great too. It can be pretty transparent, allowing you to level things pretty heavily without it sounding squashed or overcompressed. And with controls for RMS versus peak detection, feedback versus feed-forward detection, and a knee control, you can really dial it in for almost anything. So far, I've been loving this on slightly chiller vocals, like softer pop vocals or folkier stuff, as well as on acoustic guitar, piano, and it even made it onto my mix bus on a couple of songs. Okay, this next one, and I know this term gets thrown around a lot, but I genuinely mean it in this case, was a game changer for me. And that's Easy Keys 2 from Toontracks. Fun fact, I suck at playing keys, and most of the bands I work with don't have a proper keyboard player either. So when someone would have the idea to add a little piano or organ or whatever to a song, it would usually be a pretty painstaking process of either poking away at the keyboard or drawing in MIDI notes. Not a good time. With the Easy Keys Bandmate feature, you can drop in a guitar or bass DI, and it'll analyze it, map out the chords, and even suggest MIDI grooves that match the rhythm of the song. Sometimes the MIDI grooves it suggests are spot on, but other times I want something a little simpler, just add a little texture to a chorus or whatever. So I'll just use the Add Standard Groove button to quickly drop in some big ol' whole notes to follow the chords. Would I rather have an actual pianist living in my studio ready to throw down some key tracks at a moment's notice? Yeah, but Easy Keys is the next best thing, and maybe just a little bit more practical. Alright, on to the penultimate plugin, the Unfairchild compressor from Undertone Audio. I think this was initially released last year, but the CPU usage was just way too high for me, so I uninstalled it without even getting a chance to properly demo it. But earlier this year, they released an update that dramatically reduced the CPU load, making it much more usable, so I figured it was time to give it another shot. And I pretty much instantly fell in love with it. It's got a ton of character and a very different vibe and sound from pretty much everything else in my plugin folder. And it works on a ton of different sources: drum bus, vocals, bass, even mix bus. I would definitely recommend flipping through the presets while you're getting used to this, as it's a little deeper and a little more complicated than it looks at first glance. Plus the presets are really well done, so it's a good way to find a starting point, or just to get to know the plugin a bit faster. And before we get to the final plugin, I've got a few honorable mentions that I want to shout out. First is McDSP's Futzverb. This one is a lot of fun, capable of creating all kinds of weird, filtered, distorted, and lo-fi reverb sounds that would normally require a full plugin chain to create. The only reason this didn't make it into my top 10 is that it kind of feels like a specialty thing for what I do at least, like not something I would use every day or in every mix. Next is Kive Audio's VXQ. This is inspired by the Mother Audio Vivid EQ, which is inspired by the old EMI TG EQs. But what makes VXQ really fun is that Kive added 5 different transformer options, plus the ability to drive those transformers with the THD knob, and further shape the saturation with the odd and even harmonic controls, allowing you to customize the sound to your liking. I've only had this plugin for a minute now, so I'm still exploring it and finding what I like it on, but I have a feeling it'll end up on a lot of my mixes. And my final honorable mention is for Waves Factory Reesser. It takes a unique approach to de-essing by splitting the vocal into sibilants and everything else, and letting you apply effects to either. They've got a ton of effects built in, so there's potential for some pretty interesting effects. But I've been using it in a pretty basic way, using the EQ on just the sibilants to tame the harshest frequencies without taking out too much of the S's or giving the singer a lisp. I still use a traditional de-esser in most cases, but when I've got a particularly difficult vocal track, Reesser has been incredibly useful. And for my final pick for best plugins of the year, I've got Faster Master from Mastering the Mix. This is, in my opinion, the ultimate tool for polishing end-of-day rough mixes. You just let it analyze the loudest section of your track, and it will then deliver 10 of what it calls smart presets, based on the style and vibe of your track. One of these is usually spot on, but if none of them are doing it for you, you can also load in your own reference track, and it'll then apply EQ, compression, and stereo width adjustments to more closely match your reference, and bring the overall level up to the selected loudness target. But you're not stuck with what it suggests. Pretty much everything is tweakable, so if you don't like what it's doing, you can adjust it to suit what you're going for. And of course, this isn't going to replace getting a proper master done by a great mastering engineer, but for adding some polish to a rough mix or demo, or even highlighting where your mix might have some issues that need to be addressed, this thing does a really great job. And all of the elements in it sound solid, so with a bit of tweaking, there's no reason you couldn't use it in an actual mastering context either. So yeah, those are my top plugin picks for the year, but I'd love to hear from you as well. Are there any cool ones that I missed, or any that made a big impact on your mixes or workflow this year? Let me know in the comments. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want to grab any of these plugins for yourself, or just about any plugin for that matter, using my affiliate links in the description helps the channel a lot. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and happy mixing.